Welcome to the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Right now, we're going through the entire Bible to understand it as one big, cohesive story. We're covering one book each day, and this one's about Habakkuk.
Habakkuk is a prophet to the southern kingdom of Judah. It looks like his job was to show up right at the end, the last little bit of time before Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians would show up and topple Judah. So I guess he would have been working at the same time that Jeremiah was. And it looks like Habakkuk's job, even though we don't really know much about him at all, was to say, hey, Babylon's coming, this thing is going to happen. But instead of getting that oracle of judgment from Habakkuk, like we do in pretty much all of the other minor prophets, instead what we get is a conversation between Habakkuk and God, because Habakkuk doesn't like it. He has some objections. He has some problems with this strategy. And it's just assumed that Habakkuk went and said what you would expect him to say, given everything else we have here in this part of the Old Testament, to his people about God's judgment against them and about Babylon and all of that. But it's interesting because that isn't what's preserved. We get that in other places. What's preserved is, I think, a fairly reasonable question that someone in his shoes, or maybe anybody's shoes, could ask of God. And it unfolds over the course of 3 chapters. Chapters 1 and 2 are Habakkuk asking a couple of questions and God answering those questions. And then in chapter 3, we see Habakkuk get it. So we're on a character arc, a character journey here for Habakkuk, who might not like how things are going to work out, but he comes around to understanding and trusting in the character of God by the time he gets to the end of things. So we're probably looking at a time frame here about 20 years before Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians showed up, but the writing is already on the wall. No pun intended. That was an accident, but I'm going to keep it. And I think at this point, any honest person in Judah knew they were in trouble. They were happy to see the Assyrians get defeated, maybe 5-6 years before Habakkuk is writing this stuff down. Stupid Assyria, they're awful. Nahum gives us that tone of celebration and joy that everybody else would have had about the end of Nineveh and the Assyrians. But it turns out that we're out of the frying pan and into the fryer here, because Babylon has their eyes set on conquest as well. And now clearly they're going to be coming for Jerusalem. So the oracle that Habakkuk the prophet received, well, doesn't really read like much of an oracle at all. Instead, it opens with a question. How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you don't listen? Or cry out to you, violence, but you don't save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. There's strife and conflict abounding. Therefore, the law is paralyzed and justice never prevails, and the wicked hem in the righteous so that justice is perverted. So his question is basically, hey, God, if you're telling me to go and say that the end is at hand, and it looks like that's not all clear to Habakkuk totally at this point in the conversation just yet, why haven't you done anything about it already? Like, why didn't you come and correct us? Why didn't you make this evil that's happening in Judah stop? It's everywhere. We're a broken people. And then God gives Habakkuk an answer, and he's like, hey, actually, I have heard your concerns. I'm aware of it, and you'll be happy to know I'm doing something about it. And maybe at that moment, Habakkuk was like, oh, well, great. But God keeps going. He's like, yeah, I'm raising up the Babylonians, who you've no doubt heard of, and I'm going to have them come and conquer you entirely and haul everyone away into captivity. And so we're going to put an end to all that evil and violence that you're talking about going on here in Judah. And then Habakkuk in chapter 2 is like, wait, what? Well, I didn't, that is not what I had in mind. I want the evil to be corrected. Don't get me wrong. But, and it's almost like you can hear him formulating his case, but you can't use Babylon. They're even worse than us. They're more violent. They show even more disregard for you. They're more dangerous than us. In so many words, he's saying we're the lesser of two evils here. And he provides a little mental imagery here as he wraps up this second question to God. And he's like, I'm going to stand here like a watchman on the wall and keep my eyes peeled for your reply. I'm going to need an answer on this. And then God does answer, and he's like, oh yeah, no, I'm well aware of how awful Babylon is, and really all of these nations are. Oh yeah, I see it. No, they're going to get theirs too. They will be the object of my wrath and correction as well. You're going to have to trust me and you're going to have to wait on me, but that is going to happen. And then God reminds Habakkuk in so many words, I can use corrupt, evil nations to accomplish my good purposes. And then, as if just to make it crystal clear to Habakkuk that God totally understands, not just that Babylon is generically bad, but that God understands exactly how Babylon is evil, he lists out these 5 woes. And the first couple of them talk about the economic evil and oppression that goes on in Babylon. The third one talks about how they depend on slave labor, and we see God's condemnation of that there. The fourth one talks about how people are getting liquored up and making horrible decisions, and their leaders are a joke, they're debauched. And then the fifth woe deals with the idolatry, not just the cheap idolatry like the old Canaanites, but an idolatry that is a worship of the state, something that we see the exiles come up against in the incidents described in Daniel with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and with Daniel and the lion's den. And after that, we get into the final chapter and the final movement of the story. And Habakkuk, who probably had to reflect on this a little bit longer, I would think, but maybe he didn't, he snaps out of it. He's like, all right, that's a proper defense. That makes perfect sense. I need to trust you and I need to wait on you. I have no other choice than this anyway. And come to think of it, nobody ever thought that you were going to do anything about Egypt, but you were working on that the whole time. And so in a way, the judgment that you brought upon the Egyptian oppressors causes us to trust that you will judge the nations and do the things that you say you are going to do. And so in this respect, we see the book of Habakkuk walk us through a process that's kind of like the opposite of how the book of Micah a couple books ago wrapped up, with God putting Israel on trial and offering a couple of charges, questions, accusations against them. Well, this time around, Habakkuk puts God on trial, and God looks good and smart and right, whether he's the one on trial or the one putting people on trial. We also see Habakkuk twinning up with the book of Job here. Job went through all of this process, everybody saying this is why the suffering is happening, this is why things don't make sense. And in the end, he charged God with being wrong. I got a problem with you and how you run things. And God puts him in his place, and Job is like, you're right. You're right. I'm humbled. I have no choice but to trust you and your goodness and your power, and I will do that. And that's the exact same place that Habakkuk ends up. And so for the reader today, I think Habakkuk's a wildly encouraging book, not just because Babylon got beat a long time ago, and indeed they did get defeated eventually, but because there's been 1,000 metaphorical Babylons since. And pretty much all of us live in one of those, where evil and oppression and wrongdoing and worship of the state as though it's a god go unchecked. And we might be tempted to despair like Habakkuk was at the beginning and be like, why are you using things that are more evil to punish things that are less evil? Why aren't you resolving all of this evil and wickedness? Why aren't you shutting down these evil nations and this awful corruption? Well, and then we see the journey that Habakkuk goes on, and maybe as a reader we come to a place of saying, okay, I'm supposed to hate all of that evil. I'm supposed to want to see that resolved and dealt with. Maybe I'm supposed to even play a role in that at times, but mostly I am to trust that God, who is just, sees in great detail the evil and the wickedness, and that there will be an accounting for it, and that he will judge the nations. When you visualize the book of Habakkuk, picture that watchman on the wall. When you think about the theme, reflect on how God is just and good, and how he will defeat all of the evil from all of the empires. If you don't have time to read the whole thing, and hopefully you can make time, this one's very doable, very easy to follow with. If you can't, though, at least check out Habakkuk 2, verse 4, and all of the completion of Habakkuk's character arc in chapter 3. Achievement unlocked. That's Habakkuk. Internet high five. Nice job, my friends. On to Zephaniah next time around. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.
This podcast is supported by many of you at patreon.com/the TMBH podcast. We're grateful because it supports our family.